The family the world forgot. 40 years alone in the Siberian wilderness. In 1978, a Soviet helicopter flew over the Siberian wilderness. Hundreds of miles from the nearest town. No roads, no trails, no signs of life. Then the pilot looked down. Through a gap in the forest, he saw something impossible. A garden. Neat rows of vegetables, a small clearing, and a crude wooden structure that shouldn't exist in a place where no human had any reason to be. Someone was living down there, in the middle of nowhere, 150 miles from the nearest human settlement. The crew marked the coordinates. Weeks later, a team of geologists returned on foot. What they found would become one of the most extraordinary true stories ever told. A family of 6, living in complete isolation for 40 years. They had fled civilization in 1936. They didn't know World War II had happened. They didn't know about the atomic bomb. They didn't know about television, computers, or space travel. They didn't even know what year it was. This is the story of the Lykov family, why they ran. Russia in the 1930s was a dangerous place for people of faith. Karp Lykov belonged to a religious group called the Old Believers. They were a branch of the Russian Orthodox Church that had refused to accept religious reforms 300 years earlier. For centuries they were persecuted, imprisoned, executed, driven to the edges of society. When the Soviet Union took power, things got worse. The communist government was hostile to all religion. Churches burned, priests arrested, religious communities destroyed. In 1936, a Soviet patrol shot and killed Karp's brother right in front of him. That was the last day the Lykovs lived among other humans. Karp took his wife, Akulina, and their 2 young children. Savin was 9, Natalia was 2. They carried almost nothing. Some seeds, a few tools, their clothes, and their faith. They walked into the Siberian taiga. They walked for days, deeper, further, away from roads, away from villages, away from anyone who might find them. They didn't stop until they were certain no one would ever come looking. No one did, for 40 years. Surviving the impossible. The Siberian taiga is one of the harshest places on Earth. Winter lasts 9 months. Temperatures drop to -40 degrees. That number is the same in Fahrenheit and Celsius. At that point, it doesn't matter which scale you use. It's the kind of cold that kills in minutes if you're not prepared. This is where the Lykovs built their home. Not a home in the way you imagine. One room, made of logs, bark, and moss. No windows, one door. A fireplace made of stacked stones with no chimney. Smoke filled the room and escaped through cracks. Dirt floor, leaking roof, walls that frosted over on the inside during winter. They slept on the ground, huddled together under blankets made from potato sacks. They grew potatoes, turnips, and rye during the short summer, collected pine nuts, dried berries, hunted small animals with traps. In good years, they had enough. In bad years, they ate bark and leaves. In 1961, a brutal winter killed their entire crop. The seeds froze in the ground. There was nothing to eat. Akulina made a choice. She stopped eating so her children could survive. She starved to death watching her children eat the last of the food. Karp buried her behind the cabin, said a prayer, and kept going, because there was no other choice. Children who never saw the world. Two more children were born in the wilderness, Dmitri in 1940, Agafya in 1944. These two had never seen another human outside their family, never seen a town, a road, a car, never heard a voice that wasn't family, never knew billions of other people existed, never knew about cities with buildings touching the sky, never knew about electricity or running water or medicine. Their entire world was one cabin in a forest clearing surrounded by thousands of miles of wilderness. Dmitri became an extraordinary survivalist. He could track animals through deep snow, catch fish with bare hands in frozen rivers. Once, he chased an elk barefoot through the forest in winter for an entire day until the animal collapsed from exhaustion. Then he carried it home on his back. Barefoot, Siberian winter, one day, one elk. The human body does remarkable things when survival is the only option. Agafya, the youngest, had never seen bread until she was 34 years old. She didn't know what it was. She had never tasted salt, never seen a mirror. When shown her own reflection for the first time, she jumped back in fear. She thought it was another person. The world they missed. While the Lykovs lived in their forest, the world continued without them. 1939 to 1945, World War II, 70 million dead, atomic bomb invented and used, they knew nothing. 1957, Sputnik launched, space age began. They didn't know space existed beyond the sky above their trees. 1963, first human in space. They were eating bark that year to survive. 1969, moon landing. 500 million watched on television. They didn't know what television was. Cars, phones, airplanes, antibiotics, computers, nuclear weapons, pop music, fast food. All of it happened while a family sat in a forest and prayed. When geologists told Karp about satellites orbiting Earth, his response was 6 words: "People have thought up something new." Decades of human achievement summarized by a man who hadn't seen a calendar since 1936. First contact. When the geologists approached the cabin, they didn't know what to expect. Karp opened the door. He was 77, long beard, weathered face, eyes that hadn't seen a stranger in 42 years.
He stared at them. They stared at him. Silence. Then Karp spoke the first words to the outside world in 4 decades. "Well, since you have traveled this far, you might as well come in." 42 years of isolation, and his first words were an invitation. Inside the cabin was dark, smoky, and barely habitable. The smell was overwhelming. Decades of smoke, unwashed bodies, and rotting food in an enclosed space. The children hid behind their father. They had never seen modern clothes, never seen eyeglasses. Their Russian had evolved into something archaic, almost medieval, preserved in amber for 40 years. 2 groups of Russians speaking the same language, unable to fully understand each other because 40 years of separation had made their words different. The gift that killed. The geologists visited regularly after that. They brought gifts: salt, knives, seeds. Salt was the most significant. 40 years without salt. Every meal flavorless, every potato, every piece of fish, every berry without salt. When Karp tasted it again, he closed his eyes. This is truly God's gift. A mineral that costs pennies in any American grocery store was a miracle to a man who hadn't tasted it since 1936. They showed the family a television. The Lykoffs watched in stunned silence as moving pictures appeared on the screen. Karp declared it sinful and banned it. But the most dangerous gift was one that geologists didn't mean to give: germs. 40 years of isolation meant zero immunity to modern diseases, the common cold, the flu, ordinary sicknesses that healthy people fight off in days. For the Lykoffs, they were death sentences. 3 deaths in 1 year. In 1981, 3 years after first contact, 3 of the 4 Lykoff children died. 7. Kidney failure, age 54. Natalia, starvation. She refused food so Agafia could eat, just like her mother had done 20 years earlier. Dmitri, the hunter who chased elk barefoot. Pneumonia, from a common cold brought by the geologists, a disease his body had never learned to fight. Dead at 41. 3 children, 1 year, gone. The geologists had come with good intentions. They brought food and tools and kindness, but they also brought the one thing the forest had kept out for 40 years: the modern world. And the modern world killed them. Karp was 80, Agafia was 37. An old man and his youngest daughter, alone again in the same forest, in the same cabin. 3 fresh graves behind the house, and 1 old one, Akulina's, 20 years weathered. The geologists offered to relocate them: a warm house, electricity, running water, medicine. Karp refused. "We were born here. We will die here." In 1988, Karp died in his sleep, age 87, buried next to his wife, in the forest that had been both prison and sanctuary. The last one standing. When Karp died, Agafia was 44. She had never used electricity, never been to a doctor, never worn shoes that weren't made from bark, never ridden in a car, never made a phone call. She was offered apartments, government housing, a pension, a normal life. She refused everything. She stayed. As of 2025, Agafia Lykov is still alive. She is 81 years old. She still lives in the same Siberian wilderness her parents walked into in 1936. She is the last surviving Lykov. She has lived alone for over 35 years, grows her own food, chops her own wood, hauls her own water, survives winters that would kill trained survivalists. The Russian government sends supplies by helicopter occasionally. Volunteers visit once or twice a year. Every time they ask the same question: "Why don't you leave?" Every time the same answer: "This is where God put me." What it means. The Lykov story asks uncomfortable questions. Can you be happy without knowing what you're missing? They never knew about the internet or social media or the stress of modern life. Were they missing out, or were we? They lived without medicine. 3 children died from diseases any pharmacy could treat. But they were perfectly healthy until the modern world showed up. The modern world literally killed them. They lived without freedom to travel or explore, but they also lived without war, without politics, without crime. They were poor by every measurable standard, but they didn't know they were poor because there was no one to compare themselves to.
In a world where we are constantly connected, constantly overwhelmed with information and noise and screens, there is a woman in Siberia who has never sent an email, never watched YouTube, never scrolled through a phone, and she seems fine. Maybe the question isn't why the Lykovs chose to leave the world. Maybe the question is why we choose to stay. The numbers. 40 years in complete isolation, 14,600 days without seeing a stranger, minus 40 degrees every winter, zero contact with civilization. 3 children dead within 1 year of contact, 1 woman still alive in 2025. 89 years since they walked into the forest, 1 cabin, 1 clearing, 1 family, and a world that continued without them. Some people run from the world because they are afraid of it. Some people run because they have seen enough of it, and some people run because they know something.
Savin 9, old enough to remember. Natalia 2. She would never know any other life. Siberian taiga, largest forest on Earth. They vanished like a drop into the ocean. First winter, half-built shelter, fire barely lit. They survived minute by minute. Spring brought hope. First, dig a hole.
These plants are good to eat, like these?
Every lesson was from the land. Year by year they improved. Garden grew, cabin stronger, they became part of the forest. Dmitri born 1940. First breath was forest air. Wilderness was his entire universe. Agafia born 1944. The youngest. She would be the last Lykov standing. Education was the Bible. The only book. Reading by firelight. 1 book in 1 forest. Agafia talked to animals and plants.
Her only friends outside family.
She knew every tree. Wake, pray, work, eat, pray, sleep. Same cycle, 14,600 days. Bears, wolves, storms, floods, every season threats. Survival was daily battle. Akolina grew weaker, never stopped working, never stopped feeding children first. Mother's strength. 1961, snow buried everything. Ground frozen, storage empty, nothing at all. Every portion to children, none for herself. Day after day, weaker. They didn't know it was their mother's life.